Hello, and welcome back to this week's episode of Not D&D. As always, I'm your host, Jessica. It's brought to you by EN World Live. And joining me this week, we have Kayla Dice. Kayla, thanks so much for joining us.
Hi, happy to be here.
Excellent. So we're going to be talking about your game this week at Terminal, the Digital Pirate Action TTRPG. And Digital Pirate Action is an excellent tagline. I knew it drew me in, and hopefully everyone else listening and watching, it'll draw them in as well. So we'll be talking about the game. If you're watching the live stream, hello, thanks for watching live. Please do feel free to get involved in the chat and ask any questions, and we will try and answer them. And if you're listening to the podcast, anything we're talking about, we'll have links in the show notes so you can take a look as well. So, Kayla, before we dig into the game and talking about Terminal, I'll start with talking a little bit about you, if we may, because you are, I'll brag for you in case you don't, but winner of the Diana Jones Award for Emerging Designers Program in 2023. So congratulations.
Thank you. Yeah.
Well, seems like you earned that. And so I wanted to, if people aren't familiar with you and what you do, could you give us a little intro to yourself and the kind of games that you like to make?
Yeah, so I have now been making games since like December 2020. So I think I realized recently I ran a sale because it was like my 3-year anniversary of doing things.
Oh, wow.
I make games in a variety of styles, and what I often say is they all sort of focus in different ways on themes of alienation and connection. My tagline in some marketing on a banner I put was like misfit games, because I think they're all just strange or off the beaten path in some way. So Terminal is the biggest game I've ever written and put out. It was the first time I worked with a full team of people. Before then, everything I had made was more sort of just made entirely on my own and then put out on itch. So Terminal and a lot of stuff I did last year were an attempt to try and move bigger. I used to work as a teacher, and since September of last year, what I've been trying to do is making games my main thing. Terminal and other previous things I've made, like Transgender Deathmatch Legend, which was a fighting game basically. As well as things which focus a bit more on like relationships in small intimate moments. And then we go to this, which is huge and epic scale.
Of course, which we will dig into, I promise. But going back a bit, so like you say, 3 years you've been making games, which, congratulations, that's exciting. But how did you start with role-playing games? Do you remember the first game that you ever played?
Do I remember the exact first game? So I came to role-playing games comparatively late in life, I guess, in the sense that I came as an adult. I didn't have much childhood exposure of role-playing games, at least as not insisted as systems or books or stuff. The closest I got to that was like computer games, or this is a reference that will even make sense, or I'll have to explain a bit of. But I used to be a fan of wrestling, and there was a thing on wrestling where you would do like message board role play, which is called eFeds. So I did some of that. This is like my prehistory of RPGs. Then what I take to like actually coming to RPGs is in 2018, someone I was living with invited me to go to the London Indie RPG meetup, where people just pitched games they wanted to play as one-shots in the afternoon. So I don't know the name of it, and I don't know if it ever came out, but the first game I ever played, I remember, was like a GM-less cyberpunk heist game. And I think the second game I ever played was probably Monster Heart. So all of my early foundational stuff for TTRPGs was more in a sort of indie story game sphere. Somewhat atypically, I've never played D&D and don't actually know very much about it.
Well, perfect for this podcast then. You're in the right place for it. I was about to say it's really interesting because most people have started with D&D. I also didn't start with D&D. I started in a more indie space, and I also started as an adult as well, gaming. So it's interesting. I wonder if starting role-playing as an adult and not with D&D influences the sort of games that people are interested in and the games that they ultimately kind of go on to make. Because I'll be fair to say that your games are not like D&D. I wouldn't compare that as a reference point. Would that be fair to say?
And I feel I feel like some people for whom D&D is like a big part of their life, a lot of the stuff they make is in conversation with it, which I'm not saying as a criticism, just as a fact. They're like, oh, this is what I found as like an early foundational game. This is what I found frustrating or interesting. And that like root is still there. Whereas, you know, ultimately in some way, I think like the equivalent of the game for me that I'm often thinking about as the early experience is probably something like Monster Hearts or story games. So the level of complexity in D&D is something that I've always found very alienating, and is probably why I attribute to, I mean, that and not it just not having found me, but is why I would struggle to imagine it being a thing I could have been into as a kid, just because of the things I was into.
Fair enough. Well, speaking of things you're into and influences, I'd love to get into talking about Terminal as well. So could you, for people that haven't heard of Terminal, could you give us the pitch and the summary for what it is?
So the pitch of Terminal is that life as you know it of early turn of the 21st century Earth is a lie. It is a simulation called the Terminal, which is operated by the Robot Authority, who keep humanity essentially under control in dream state, not because they're needing to do so for any sort of survival, but because they believe they know the way that life should exist. And outside of the simulation, there are people who've broken free, sort of outcasts, rejects, people who just couldn't fit in with the way the world was and then had to sort of break out and change it. And they trawl the seas as digital pirates. They do battle with the robots on the seas, as well as then jacking in back into the terminal to try and work to take it down. So it is very inspired by the Matrix, but essentially turning the outside world into a sort of post-apocalyptic pirate thing. They're all sort of dispatched from the island Libertatia, which is a kind of, you know, implicit anarcho-communist setting. It's a game with post-apocalypse, dystopias, utopias, a lot of different sort of scenes. And yeah, you're going in, diving in and confronting individual crashes where you're fighting agents of the system or other sort of like third parties or systems who maybe have their own sort of agendas and stuff, and you're working to crash the world, basically.
Sounds great. Someone in the comments has asked the question, so the Matrix with parrots and eye patches?
Yeah, definitely. It's absolutely so like the inner world, that's very Matrix-like, and then when you get to the outer world, it's very pirate themed. Both in the sense of like the aesthetics you might be trading in, but also I think in a lot of the spirit of pirate fiction, which can kind of be about, for better or worse, being about outside of society, outside of like their limits, and that opening possibilities and danger in terms of like, well, how does society feel about you trying to not be there?
Yeah, absolutely. So with the game, like you said, excellent thing there. Matrix, obviously like a reference, but there kind of are many more. Could you talk a little bit more about the other references and inspirations you had making this game?
So obviously one half of it was pirate fiction and bringing that in. I think a lot of my conception of pirate fiction comes from things like Black Sails, iterations of Treasure Island, of which there are like many, and then I guess like just a lot of sort of thematic stuff. In terms of things within the world, there's a lot of different stuff in there, and there's like a big inspirations book at the back. I did some blog posts about different aspects of it, because there's the Matrix itself, but also other things. I say like Twin Peaks as a reference point sometimes. In a lot of ways, just for a sort of the way the dreamlike logic of the simulation works, which also brings in some Paprika influence. There's a sort of ethereal unreality to the inner workings of Terminal, which comes, I think, more from those influences than it does from the Matrix itself. There's a bit of stuff in Matrix 1 there, you know, the sort of not knowing if you're waking or dreaming. Twin Peaks and Paprika also then inspire specific individual storylines. There's one scenario which draws a lot of inspiration from like the Dream Parade in Paprika. There's one that has the sort of twisted suburbia that I was thinking with sort of Blue Velvet. And then I guess the other thing when thinking about inspiration is often sort of commentary as well. Certain things develop out of ideas I found interesting in the Matrix or in other things, but wanted to interrogate and wanted to see from different lights. And then also I think some inspiration comes from other games I've played. So the sort of core system of the book was a hack of Inevitable by Soul Muppet Publishing. And I played in a campaign of that, and even the very different genre experience, really different sort of societal focuses. But it did, in some senses, inspire me in terms of both in terms of system, but also in terms of the story arc that focuses more on the inner workings of the island Libertatia and how your character is perceived. But then there's lots of smaller stuff. I said in a blog post recently, the hedonist as a character, I can point to an inspiration where like they're a bit the Merovingian, they're a bit this character from Mass Effect, they're a bit this, and then I can also go, they're also one of my friends. This character is me at 19, this character is me at 28. Inspiration's a funny thing.
Yeah, definitely. I want to jump back to, you were talking about the system there a little bit. So people that aren't familiar with the system, could you give an overview of mechanically how the game works?
So the way it works is essentially that your character is mainly defined by their reputations, which is the way they are perceived both by the robot authority, by your pirate comrades, as well as sort of any other people who are having big opinions about you. Within the game, you kind of have this built up of a series of challenges across scenes that lead to one pivotal showdown. Where challenges, you build a dice pool, you're leveraging things like your reputation, like any sort of equipment you have, which otherwise is just really focused on the fiction. And then we see how things play out, and there can be successes earning showdown tokens, which go into this eventual showdown and are essentially a boost, a bonus. We're working on like this overall goal in whatever the mission is in the simulation here. But also there can be consequences, and sometimes that might be, okay, you've gained an advantage, they've gained an advantage. You're still sort of neck and neck as things progress. Or it could be, okay, you're really dealing well with this, but you've ignored this other thing, and some other threats elsewhere are developing badly. Could be damages to how people think of you or feel about you. That's the sort of challenge and the build-up of these stories. You play a band of daring pirates, sailing the ship, plugging into the simulation, fighting the agents inside and the robots outside. But once you get to these pivotal showdowns, which might end individual operations or even bigger story arcs, you are gambling everything on a single roll where you have all your bonuses from everything you've earned, but then you also get to add other bonuses by what you're willing to sacrifice. So if a showdown is, we need to defeat this. The end of one of the scenarios involves like you've dived into a sleeper's mind, and you are trying to wake them up from the simulation itself, and they're stopped by a program who's a twisted doppelganger of them, a version who's not unsatisfied, a version who is fitting in society, who dresses the right way, who says the right things, and is able to sort of hold down jobs and rent and other stuff, which this actual sleeper is struggling with. And you're fighting this program within their mindscape. You may have all the bonuses from how well you've done. That could be free things, so it's like +3. And then you would say what you're willing to sacrifice. And it could be giving up something physical. You say like, oh, I want to sacrifice this weapon, or I want to damage our ship in some way. And go, okay, that's +3. So you've got like a +6 here, and you're rolling to beat the overall threat posed by this thing. Or it could be other things. It could be, I want to change my reputation. I want to kill this program in a way that's really violent. I had a reputation that was like fair, and now this is going to get replaced by something that says cruel. And they're like, oh, well, a lot of people aren't going to trust you because of that now. That's maybe worth like a +5. And if we're trying to beat this score of 10, okay, we've got a +5, and we add a single roll to that. So it's big swings, and it
Yeah.
focuses the game on what you're willing to give up and what you're willing to essentially burn down to build a future that matters to you and the characters around you.
Amazing. I imagine that could be something like kind of emotional and personal to you as well. Could it be something like, I'm going to do this, but it's probably going to break this character and they're not going to be the same after doing it? Could you do something to immediately take it to a dark place? Sorry, that's typically me in this type of game. Yeah.
It could be you gain a reputation which is haunted because of the things you've seen or what you did. It could be about your relationships. It could be, I'm going to viciously kill this character, or I'm going to sacrifice my relationship with someone. I'm going to say that the fact that I'm going to run off and deal with this problem on our ship means that the ship's navigator, who I've been dating for 3 months in storyline, they can't trust me anymore because they think I'm too self-sacrificing. The consequence there is that relationship is destroyed. And because it's focused on what it means to the characters and the narratives, you could be like, oh yeah, +6 for that. That's giving up the relationship. Obviously, that's huge.
So as a GM, when you're running this game, you have these challenges and talking about the consequences of that. Is it quite freeform then in how you interpret like the pluses or the minuses or mechanically what that means?
Yeah, I think a lot of the GM's responsibility in Terminal is making judgment calls about what something represents, how something is valued mechanically, at least. And that judgment call is kind of also about the kind of game you want to be playing. If you say, I want to really focus on material consequences for things, and maybe you don't want to necessarily have big reputational swings or changes to the character be there, you say, how does this affect our overall chances of defeating the robot authority? That could be one way a GM and a table plays it if that's how they feel. Or it could be, I really want to focus on the narrative. I want big costs. I'm going to award big costs when something hurts because this is the story we're telling rather than the history. It's a lot of interpreting that, but there's also a lot of guidance. There's a whole table of examples, I think ranging from, I can't actually remember the numbers off the top of my head, but there's a whole table of examples that help guide you and suggestions. I think it's a game that lays out a lot of big picture scenarios and hopefully models how you can break that down into more granular sessions of play. I think it involves a lot of trust at the table to play fairly, or at least a lot of like good open lines of communication. But I do think the game hopefully facilitates and helps you out and is there in terms of making you feel like you know what you're doing.
Excellent. Yeah. With running a game as well. So you have in the game, you have kind of two stages or genres. You have time in the terminal and then time in the real world. And they're going to feel a bit different, I imagine, because of the nature of what they are. And it looks quite open as how often you spend time in either, because it depends on the characters and the story you're telling. How do you kind of run the game? What sort of balance do you have, and what guidance do you give to other people running the game?
Yeah, so personally, for me, I think when I run things, and it's been commented on by some people who like this and some people who don't, it's really, I imagine, just personal preference. I pull back the curtain so much to ask people. I may go, okay, we could pursue this lead in the terminal, or we could pursue it in the wake. I can make it work either way. What scene are people more interested in playing now? That's how I often approach stuff, and I might have like bigger picture early conversations. Within the game itself, I say this is really a matter of sort of fine-tuning things. You can pull out of the simulation loads, and it can be about approaching lots of stuff from different angles, or you can stay in there. I remember saying, there's probably ways of playing this where it's like 50%. I imagine I probably play it out as like 80% in the simulation and 20% in the terminal. But in games I've run, it's common for like one session to be all terminal action, and then we did an entire session which was a sort of cool down one where we were entirely on the pirate island Libertatia and meeting those characters, and we weren't plugging in at all. We were just reacting to what happened. The game, like I said, has a lot of different scenarios. Of those, 4 are very focused on in the simulation. 1 is focused entirely on the pirate island and the inner workings of the pirates and their relationship with each other. And then the other, I may have misspoken there. 3, 1, 2. Yeah, then there's a 2 which are a lot of mix, a lot of back and forth. You're tracking things down. You're looking about in the wake on the seas, but then once you track down, you're plugging in. So it is a case of, if you have a way of GMing that's maybe more top down, I imagine it's more you make that call early on and you decide what's being featured. For me, it would be a lot of checking in, but that's really just a difference of GM style rather than me making that as a pull of like, you should be doing this because I wrote the game and that's how you should be doing it. It's more, that's how I do it because I'd find it fun.
Sure. You're not going to come around and tell people off for running it a different way in their house, I guess.
Yeah. If someone said, yeah, I reckon this is like a 60 terminal, 40 wake, and I'm just deciding that ahead of time, I'm not going to go like, hey, you're going to need a license for that kind of GMing decision. Can I see your credentials?
Fair enough. So leaving it open, which is great. Opposite of leaving it open is controlling things. And obviously control is a really key theme in the game because you have the robot authority, which are controlling all these people that are, in the terminal and plugged in. And that's a theme I kind of thought was interesting to play with the game, because control can sometimes be very obvious, but sometimes it can be more subtle and kind of coercive. Could you talk about control and that theme in the game and how it appears in that?
Yeah, it emerged early on as like the big theme for me, and so much in the way this is a game about control, about people who want to control you, and often that way of control being to make you doubt yourself or doubt your sanity or your perception of things, and then people exploiting that. It's a game that in its like early sort of content warnings, they say, as written, this is threaded with a lot of themes of coercive control. I give that as a warning to the reader of the book, first and foremost, because I think they deserve that consideration. Yeah. I do then say, in a running experience, this can be de-emphasized. It could become more authoritarian coded if that was the story you were interested in playing. But I think it's very important to be fair with the reader of what they should expect as they go through the book.
Yeah.
It manifests in a lot of different ways. The terminal and the robot authority, they're antagonists within the system. They've had for a long time this essentially god of the terminal, who's called the director, who just structures things and relies on a lot of predictability. This is the way things work. This is the way things look. But in this latest cycle of rebooting their simulation repeatedly, they've introduced a new major antagonistic program who focuses a lot more on personal manipulation and blackmail and threats, and specifically trying to keep people miserable. I think I said in a blog post maybe that I think a lot of the scenarios in the game are about standing up and trying to pull away from control in different phases. Tortures of the Killer, which if you're watching the live stream is on screen right now, is one that focuses a lot on threats and blackmail and essentially people being hurt to try and keep you in line. Something like Multiplied by Zero, I think, focuses a lot on control of people taking over and overwhelming you, or one person making it seem like there is this big sort of flood that is overwhelming you. Curations of the Archivist focuses on a character, an antagonistic character who is freezing things and trying to keep them in pristine conditions. So it's all these different angles, and a lot of time you're needing to make an argument, I think in some ways, at least as I was thinking of it, of like why all of these people are wrong. Like they're saying something about you, your character specifically, and you're standing up and saying they're wrong. Tortures of the Killer, it's saying we know how to get you to do what we want. multiplied by 0 is saying like the way you feel isn't good enough. Durations of the Archivist is saying you have a purpose and you should be sticking in that. And so on and so on. And all of these points are about saying, sort of like, you know, telling the robot authority and systems like, screw you, you're wrong. I know what I'm doing.
Yeah, I love that in the game. And I love what you mentioned as well about letting people know in advance, because that's a theme some people aren't interested in exploring and playing with. So I think saying, hey, this is in the game, so people know they can pick it up and play with it, or they can change it so they're not playing with that sort of game if they don't want to.
Yeah, I definitely think it's something where it's in the writing, so it's there to see, definitely. As a reader engaging with a book as an audience, it's there, and it's the thing that has to be there. And if that's too much for you, I'd very strongly just say, like, you know, leave it right now. Come back to it maybe sometime when you feel you want to engage with that theme. As a player and a GM, though, I'd say you can remove it easily. And there's a lot of stuff on individual crashes and specific content warnings I give them where I'm like, you can pull this crash entirely out of the game and it matters nothing. You can use this crash and just pull this element out. This one, it's not a load-bearing scenario, but like, yeah, just maybe take this out because it's these themes. And yeah, build, I hope, and, you know, I hope, and I did what I think is my best in terms of within the way you use the world that's in the game. I hope I've given people the tools to do that safely.
Absolutely. Well, speaking about the game, Terminal was crowdfunded in July of last year. Congratulations, funded on there. And you've had your digital release in December, if I'm correct. So if people are interested in picking up a copy of the game or interested in learning more, where's a good place for them to go online to get a digital copy of the game?
So buying digital copy now, the best place to do that is itch. So routwavegamehouse.itch.io/terminal. That's where you can purchase the digital version. So it's written and designed by me. It is beautifully illustrated by Gorman Geist, who's also an amazingly talented designer. It's really slick and gorgeous, but also so much art in it. I remember looking at and going specifically, yes, this feels very, very powerful in terms of like how it strikes a lot of the heart of things. And it was edited by Alyssa Ridley. So if you go online digitally, itch.io, routwave.gamehouse.itch.io/terminal.
Fantastic. And talking about the art a little bit there, because I forgot to kind of ask you about it. So what the game, people watching the live stream can see pictures of it, and if you're listening to the podcast, there's links so you can go have a look there. But it has a very distinct and clear art style. So I imagine you had a real collaborative conversation about what you wanted for that. What was your vision for the way the game looked?
So I remember I created a big mood board early on when I first connected with Gorman Geist, which included a lot of visual inspiration for what I imagined inside the terminal. It was a lot of modern clothes. I imagined it inspired. I remember specifically when I was looking for an artist, I remember going, I want someone who can do fashion very well, and I want someone who can do action, because it's an action game in the kinds of stories it's telling. And Gorman Geist is great at like dynamic, beautiful scenes. But then fashion specifically, because I think it was important, because so much of the character's self-image in the terminal is about how they want to express themselves. It's taking control of their appearance. So I gathered a lot of sort of like punk fashion, queer fashion, like sort of club gear. And that was how the world inside the terminal looks. Then outside, it's a focus on pirate stuff while also being a sort of post-apocalyptic in some senses, kind of like post-apocalyptic, because it's moved sort of further, but giving a sense of the characters in the wake where they are making do with scraps. They're really well at making do with scraps, but things are a little more sort of rugged and made out of recycled materials. repurposed sort of salvage. And beautiful thing, which was Gormengeist's initial suggestion, she talked about how she did a different color, focusing on like a very specific palette and then various shades of there. So we ended up deciding on one palette for inside the terminal and then one palette for images in the wake, the real world, which I think looks really beautiful in the game. It's such a quick, decisive way of telling sort of what scene something belongs to. Yeah, so that was a lot of the collaboration there. And then early stuff was like, oh, I think I need this scene. I was sort of building the book with pieces of art in mind of where they'd go. And also I remember for a lot of images as well, maybe not a lot, maybe I'm overstating that when I break down the whole, but there's definitely a point in the process I remember I sent her an email being like, oh, I need some stuff for challenges, showdowns, and this. Is there anything we haven't done that you'd like to be drawing?
Nice.
Because I did want it to be, you know, a collaborative effort where we're co-creators of the game, because I think the visual style here sort of so perfectly conveys the game and what it's about to people. And there are some really beautiful pieces in the game which I think really cut to like certain elements of like a trans experience that I was bringing in forefront in bringing. Sorry, let me rephrase that because I just stumbled over my words a lot. There's certain parts of like transness and queerness that I feel really beautifully shown in certain pieces nearer the back of the book, and just illustrating stuff that I felt was really, really great about the game, and it could only exist because of that collaboration.
Wonderful. Well, it is a gorgeous book. I love the artwork in it, and I love the graphic design and the layout as well. It feels like the layout is so important in RPGs, I think, because it's how you interact with the game, how you learn it, and it can really change your gaming experience for how easy it is to digest the information. And especially for me, because I'm dyslexic, so reading things has never been like a love of mine. But I had to say this book
Same.
really,
I've loved recently.
Yeah, but so the way things are laid out is kind of so important for how you digest information, and the way this was laid out I found really nice to kind of have a look at, so you feel you can absorb the information and know kind of where you need to go with things. So I wanted to shout that out as well to anyone else thinking about picking up the game. I'm really excited to get a physical copy because I'm a sucker for physical books, and if you can see the collection of things behind me. So what are your plans for like a physical release of the book? Because it's available digitally now, so we can get that now, which is great. But what are the plans in 2024 for physical copies?
Yeah, so tomorrow at the time of the interview, which will be Tuesday the 23rd, I'm doing a update to Terminal digitally because people who followed along with the Kickstarter may remember a series of stretch goals were for guest writers to create techno fables, essentially putting their own spin on different parts of the world of Terminal, kind of like the Animatrix, but for RPGs, I guess.
Sure.
Not really,
yeah, okay.
but I think that was a great line. And yeah, so I was just over the last month and a half getting people's stretch goals edited and back to them, and I've now put them into layout, so there'll be an update to add all of that great work from the guest writers. Then I will, as I send out that update and say, hey, all of this stretch goal stuff is in there, I will be saying, can anyone tell me, you've now had a bit of time with the game, and also there'll just be a week here, can anyone tell me if they've noticed any mistakes that slipped past as a sort of just catchment grace period? Then at the end of that week, I'll be sending Terminal to printers and we'll get work on fulfillment. We're using Soul Muppet Publishing as a fulfillment partner. Basically, the game will be sent and initially sold out of their store, and all of the Kickstarter backers who back to physical will receive code to work through the store. But yeah, so that means Terminal physical should be, I feel sort of I could expect starting to go out around February.
Ooh, exciting.
Or I don't know exactly. I'm not necessarily great on shipping information off the top of my head, so I don't know when it will be getting to people. But February will be definitely when that's starting.
Amazing.
And from there, I'll also have it available at conventions and places going forward.
Amazing. Are you going to any conventions this year? Have you got any planned or?
I did Dragon Meet last December. I believe I should be going to UK Games Expo.
Perfect.
Other smaller ones I might sort of try and take a look at. I've also, where I live in London, I'm trying this sort of start of the year to be going to sort of like local art markets and such, and seeing if they're a place where people might be interested in buying TTRPGs. So if that starts to prove good and I end up doing it again, there's a chance I'll show up at a market randomly with 10 copies of Terminal if you're in London.
Amazing. So just local markets, have a look in London and see if it's there. Amazing. Well, and I know you have plans, you have other plans for things that you're doing at the moment as well. What are your future plans over at Ratwave?
So I recently did a big newsletter where I was talking about a lot of my upcoming plans. The sort of first, most immediate one is I am going to crowdfund on February 6th, where I'm going to be launching a small zine called Ritual Magic for Besties. I'm co-creating it with the artist Molamute. It is a GM-less tarot game where you play like a coven of interconnected spellcasters who are getting together, exploring their personal history, and using that to cast magic spells. I've then done a few previews of different games I'm hoping to be taking to various stages this year. I am working on a sequel to Transgender Deathmatch Legend. I'm working on a Belonging Outside Belonging game about diving into physical dungeons that are emerging from people's trauma. I'm hopefully got a lot of exciting projects, and it's just hoping that they come together, hoping that they're well received. So yeah, if you're listening, I'd really encourage, and it sounds like your kind of game, I'd really encourage checking out the Ritual Magic for Besties crowdfunder, because some support there could be really helpful. And then yeah, hopefully I'll be hitting up conventions, markets if people are interested in TTRPGs there, and hopefully I'll be trying to freelance, which is I'm also available for freelance layout and writing work. I did the layout. I was the layout artist for Terminal as well as the writer, the very praised on this podcast, thankfully. So yeah, I'm excited for what I'm hopefully gonna get going in 2024.
I'm excited too as well. And so if you're interested in following, keeping up with that, if you go to ratwave.uk, that's the website with all the social links and stuff and information. So if any of that sounds appealing, I'm sure if you go to ratwave.uk, you can find more links and information to anything that interested you there. Kayla, thanks so much for coming on and talking to me and giving up your time to share your game with me. Before I let you go, I do have a question I ask everyone, and it's if you have any recommendations for any other tabletop RPGs, and the rules are it can't be D&D, but it sounds like that wouldn't be one of your recommendations anyway, and it also can't be a game that you've made. So do you have any other games you'd like to shout out?
I've been thinking about this a lot. What I've been reading lately since I got it last year, and I've been really enjoying reading. I picked up a Dragon Meet Talk by Will Jobst. It's rally road racing, sort of Mad Max style gameplay on a grid, torn between like rally sessions where you're doing sort of combat to each other on the road as you're driving to wherever your destination is, and then rest stops. It seems, just from reading through it, seems really interesting, exciting. It's laid out in a really fun way that, at least for me, I find really helps guide my eye. And also, thank you for having me on the podcast and enjoying the game. It's such an honor. Thank you.
Well, you're very welcome. Thanks so much for making the game. So I think we've run up to the end of our time there. So thank you for your recommendations and for your time coming on. Very excited to see what you're doing in the future. And if you have any other games you want to come on and share with us, you have our details now. And thank you to everyone that's listened or watched the podcast. If any of this has been remotely interesting to you, I'd really recommend you check out the website, because the best way to support indie tabletop RPG creators is to buy their things. But I think that's all from us this week. So on that note, I will say thank you very much and goodbye. Thank you very much.
Bye.
Bye.